A horror director got arrested for murder. The FBI opened an investigation because Charlie Sheen thought he watched someone actually die. And there's a movie from 1969 that's still illegal to own in the UK today. And somehow, these are just the beginning of the most legally disastrous horror films ever made. So let's start with the movie that basically ruined Christmas shopping for an entire generation of British parents. The Driller Killer is this grimy little slasher about a starving artist named Reno who lives in New York and has what you might call anger management issues. His solution to life stress? Grab a power drill and start making holes in homeless people. Real classy stuff. Now, this movie was directed by Abel Ferrara, who you might know from other cheerful films about urban decay and human misery. This whole thing cost about $37 to make, which is probably why it looks like someone filmed it during a blackout. Reno's apartment is this disgusting cave where he lives with his girlfriend and some other woman, and there's a punk band next door that never stops practicing, which to be fair, would drive anyone to murder people. The plot is pretty simple. Reno can't pay rent, can't sell his paintings, and the punk band is making him lose his mind. So naturally, he decides the best solution is to buy a power drill and start decorating the streets with people's brains. The kills are gross, but not exactly groundbreaking. Guy gets drilled in the head, blood goes everywhere, Reno moves on to the next victim, rinse and repeat. But here's where it gets stupid. When this thing hit video stores in the UK in 1982, someone decided to put the most disturbing cover art possible on the box. I can't show it on YouTube, but picture this, a close-up of a power drill going straight into a guy's forehead. Blood spraying everywhere, with text that basically screamed, "Come watch people get murdered." Very subtle, Abel. Nice job. British parents saw this thing on video store shelves next to Disney movies and collectively lost their minds. Which honestly, fair enough. Nobody wants to explain to their 7-year-old why the man on the movie box has a hole where his face used to be. The cover became the symbol of everything wrong with video stores. And suddenly, everyone from church groups to parliament was talking about this crappy little movie. By 1984, the UK government was so fed up with complaints that they basically declared war on horror movies. The Driller Killer got banned, which meant police could raid video stores and seize copies. Picture grown adults in uniforms confiscating VHS tapes about a guy with a drill, treating it like they were busting a drug ring. The whole thing was ridiculous. Store owners were getting prosecuted for having this movie on their shelves. Not for selling it to kids, just for having it exist in their store. One day you're running a normal video rental place, the next day you're explaining to a judge why you thought it was okay to stock a movie about power tool murders. What a big career highlight. The really funny part is that nobody actually watched the movie. They just saw the cover and assumed it was the most violent thing ever made. When people finally saw it 15 years later, most of them were like, wait, that's it? The actual violence is pretty tame compared to what you can see on basic cable now, but the cover art did its job. It scared the hell out of people who never even pressed play. The ban lasted until 1999, which means there were a whole generation of British horror fans who had to smuggle this movie in from other countries. Imagine explaining to customs why you're importing a film about drill-based homicide. It's for research purposes, officer. Sure it is. Even when they finally allowed it back, they cut out nearly a minute of footage. The head explosion scene, some stabbing, basically anything that might remind people why they banned it in the first place. It wasn't until 2002 that British audiences could see the full uncut version of a movie about a mentally ill artist with anger issues. But sometimes, censors just made the violence look better than it actually was. If you're enjoying this video so far and want me to cover more topics like this in the future, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to the channel because it's the only way to tell YouTube that I'm actually doing a good job as a YouTuber. Also, my dog gets mad at me if I'm failing at my career, so there's that. Anyways, moving on, sometimes a special effects guy was just too damn good at his job. Tom Savini had a problem. He was really good at making fake blood look real, and in 1981, that turned out to be a career-limiting skill. The Burning is this summer camp slasher where a pissed-off caretaker named Cropsy comes back to murder teenagers with garden shears. You know, standard stuff. But Savini's gore effects were so convincing that British authorities thought they were watching actual snuff footage. The story starts with Cropsey getting burned alive in a prank gone wrong. Fast forward 5 years and he's back at summer camp with a serious grudge and some very sharp gardening tools. The plot is pretty basic. Horny teenagers go to camp. Cropsey shows up, teenagers stop being horny because they're dead. Classic 80s horror formula. But then comes the raft scene. Oh boy, the raft scene. A bunch of campers are floating around on this raft when Cropsey pops up and just goes to town. Fingers get chopped off, throats get slashed, blood sprays everywhere. Savini made it look so real that when censors watched it, they genuinely thought they were seeing people get straight up murdered. Here's the thing about Tom Savini. The guy was a Vietnam veteran who knew what real violence looked like. So when he made fake violence, it had this awful authenticity that made people's stomachs turn. He wasn't just throwing red paint around. He was creating wounds that looked like they could actually kill you. The BBFC took one look at this movie and basically had a collective nervous breakdown. They cut about 20 seconds of gore for the cinema release, but even that wasn't enough. When it hit video stores, they freaked out again and demanded more cuts. The raft scene got butchered. The shower murder got trimmed. Basically, any moment where Savini showed off his skills got the axe. And here's where it gets really stupid. Store owners had no idea which version they were selling. Was it the cut version? The uncut version? Nobody knew. So they just pulled the movie entirely rather than risk getting raided by the police. The police raids were real though. Officers would show up at video stores with lists of banned movies, searching through inventory like they were looking for weapons. Sir, do you have any copies of The Burning? Which version? The one that makes people think teenagers actually dead. Oh yeah, that one. It's right next to Bambi. What's really funny is that nobody bothered to ask Tom Savini how he made the effects. The guy would have happily explained his techniques. Instead, they just assumed he was somehow filming real murders and calling it special effects. Because apparently that's a normal career path, transitioning from makeup artist to serial killer. I used to work in the film industry actually as a production assistant. One of the coolest jobs ever is to see a special effects makeup artist work on horror films, by the way. It is art what they can do. The movie stayed banned in the UK until 1992, and even then they cut out 19 seconds. It wasn't until 2001 that British audiences could see Tom Savini's complete work. That's 20 years of censorship because a makeup artist was too good at his job. Imagine that performance review. Tom, your work is incredible. Unfortunately, it's also banned in several countries. We are now getting raided by the FBI. You get a raise. By the time they finally released it uncut, horror fans had moved on to way more extreme stuff. The raft scene that once terrified censors now looked pretty tame. Turns out what seems shocking in 1981 feels almost quaint 20 years later. But Tom Savini's reputation was already cemented. The man who made fake violence too real. The really ironic part is that The Burning became more famous for being banned than for being good. Most people who sought it out just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. And when they finally watched it, half of them were probably thinking, that's it. But by then, Savini had already moved on to other projects where being talented wasn't a crime. But making realistic gore was nothing compared to what some filmmakers put on screen, because some Italian filmmakers decided realistic just wasn't enough anymore. Joe D'Amonto made a movie that managed to disgust people who watch horror movies for fun. Think about that for a second. There are folks who voluntarily spend their Friday nights watching people get chopped up. You're looking at one of them. And even they were like, okay, that's too much. Anthropophagus is about a cannibal guy living on a Greek island who eats tourists, and it features 2 scenes that made grown adults walk out of the movie theaters. The plot is pretty simple. Some tourists visit this island and find it basically empty except for one very hungry resident. This guy Nikos survived a shipwreck by eating his own family, which apparently gave him a taste for human flesh. Now he just hangs out on this island waiting for new visitors to show up. Yeah, it's pretty bad. Most of the movie is standard slasher stuff. People walk around, Nikos picks them off one by one, blood gets everywhere, nothing too crazy by Italian horror standards. But then D'Amonto decided to include a scene that made people question his mental health. A pregnant woman gets caught by Nikos, and he doesn't just end her life, he rips out the fetus and eats it. On camera, in close-up. Now, before you start thinking about calling the police, it was obviously fake, but Demonto made it look real enough that audiences were genuinely horrified. We're talking about people who came to see a cannibal movie and they still couldn't handle what they were watching. That takes some serious commitment to being disgusting. Like, imagine you're going to a movie theater and you're like, okay, this is a cannibal movie. I know people are gonna get eaten. And then that disturbs you. That's pretty impressive. The UK took one look at this scene and immediately banned the whole movie. Not just cut it, banned it entirely. For 20 years, you could not legally buy this film in Britain. Customs officers would seize imported copies. Video store owners could get prosecuted just for having it on their shelves, all because of one scene that lasted maybe 30 seconds. But wait, it gets worse. The ending has Nikos getting stabbed in the gut, and instead of just dying normally, he starts eating his own intestines as they spill out. Because apparently, regular death scenes weren't gross enough for Demonto. The man really committed to his vision of making audiences throw up. Germany banned this so hard, they probably banned movies that just sounded similar. The film was put on their official never show this list and stayed there for over 30 years. Police could confiscate copies and prosecute anyone trying to sell them. Imagine explaining to your cellmate that you're in jail for selling a movie about a guy eating that. What's really funny is the horror fans started treating this movie like some kind of challenge. You weren't a real horror buff until you've seen this movie. People would trade bootleg copies like they were dealing drugs. Secret horror movie clubs would screen it at midnight just so members could prove they could handle it. The movie became way more famous for being banned than for being good. Most people who finally saw it were probably disappointed. Take away the two infamous scenes and you've got a pretty basic slasher that moves slower than rush hour traffic. But those two scenes were enough to get it banned in more countries than most people can name off by heart. Australia even refused to rate it for years. Norway said absolutely not. Even some places in the US wouldn't show it, which is saying something because America usually lets you watch pretty much anything as long as you're old enough to vote. But apparently eating babies crosses cultural lines. But the movie's pretty bad actually, so is this scene really needed? I don't know. I'm all for crazy scenes, but the movie needs to be good. Shock value just for shock value does not make a good movie, and I just think it's tacky. I don't know, what do you think? The real weird part is that Demonto kept making movies after this. You'd think after creating something so gross that governments felt the need to protect adults from seeing it, he might tone things down a bit. Nope, he just kept churning out exploitation films until he died. The man was committed to his craft, even if his craft was making people puke in a movie theater. It wasn't until the 2000s that most countries finally allowed the movie to be sold again. But by then, horror had gotten so extreme that this movie looked almost quaint. When you can watch Saw movies at your local multiplex, a 30-year-old Italian gore fest doesn't seem quite as shocking. But for a while there, this thing was treated like it contained actual nuclear waste. But even Anthropophagus was just getting started compared to what some directors were willing to film, because Ruggero Deodato decided hour-long torture was better than quick scares. Ruggero Deodato looked at home invasion movies and thought, you know what these need? More psychological torture and way less hope. The house on the edge of the park is about two thugs who crash a fancy party and spend the entire night terrorizing rich people. And when I say the entire night, I mean it. This thing does not let up for a single minute. David Hess plays Alex, the main psycho, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he was also the bad guy in Last House on the Left. That's crazy, you do two roles in that sort of vibe, but yeah, apparently Hess hadn't cornered the market on playing guys you wouldn't want at your dinner party. He shows up at this upscale house party with his buddy Ricky, and what starts as gate crashing quickly turns into a hostage situation. Instead of just having the bad guys kill everyone and move on, he makes you watch them humiliate and torture the victims for 90 straight minutes. We're talking about forced poker, bad stuff to do to other people, psychological games, and general sadism that just keeps going and going. It's exhausting to watch, which is probably the point. The UK took one look at this movie and said, absolutely not. The BBFC refused to give it any rating at all in 1981. Not an 18, not an X, nothing. They basically declared it too disturbing for adult humans to watch voluntarily. That's quite an achievement when you think about it. making something so unpleasant that the government decides to protect grown-ups from their own bad decisions. What made it worse was that the whole thing takes place in real time. You can't skip ahead or fast forward through the uncomfortable parts because the entire movie is the uncomfortable parts. Deodato created this claustrophobic nightmare where the audience is trapped with these people just as much as the victims are. Fun Saturday night viewing for the whole family, apparently. I know what I'm watching with the kids. Well, maybe that's why my ex-wife Becky left me. The movie got prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act, which means British authorities thought it was literally obscene, not just violent or disturbing, but legally obscene. That's the same category as hardcore corn farming, if you know what I mean. Imagine being Deodato and finding out your artistic vision was considered equivalent to illegal corn by an entire government. Video store owners could get arrested for having this thing on their shelves, not for selling it to kids, just for owning a copy, which you're gonna see is a very common thread between a lot of these movies. The ban lasted until 2002, which means there was a whole generation of British people who grew up without knowing this movie existed. 21 years of censorship because Deodato thought audiences needed to experience prolonged psychological trauma. By the time they finally released it, they still cut out nearly 12 minutes of the worst stuff. Even today, you can't buy the full uncut version in the UK. In 2011, they reviewed it again, decided that even modern audiences couldn't handle 43 seconds of the most extreme content. That's 30 years after original ban, and they're still saying, yeah, that's too much. So Deodato really committed to making something unwatchable. The really funny part is that Deodato treated all of this controversy like it was just part of his job. Oh, another movie got banned for 20 years? Must be a Tuesday. The man had zero chill when it came to making audiences miserable, and he seemed genuinely confused when people got upset about it. What's wild is that the movie has this twist ending where it turns out the rich people planned the whole thing as revenge. So after sitting through 90 minutes of torture, you find out it was all justified because Alex had done terrible things before. It's like Deodato wanted to mess with your head even after you've already been traumatized. Modern horror fans who finally get to see it are usually shocked that something this brutal was made in 1980. Most films that are this extreme didn't show up until the 2000s, but Deodato was already perfecting the art of making audiences genuinely uncomfortable decades earlier. The man was ahead of his time in all the worst ways. But sustained psychological torture was nothing compared to what some directors claimed was educational, because Umberto Lenzi thought being banned was the best marketing strategy. Cannibal FEROX is what happens when someone decides to make violence their entire brand. The poster literally says the most violent film ever made and banned in 31 countries, which is, I didn't even know there was more than 31 countries, which was honestly about as subtle as a brick through a window. Director Umberto Lenzi looked at the success of other cannibal movies and thought, I can make something more disturbing than that. Mission accomplished, I guess. The plot is your standard cannibal movie setup. Some graduate students go to the Amazon to study cannibalism, meet a psycho drug dealer named Mike, and everything goes horribly wrong. Mike's been torturing the local tribe for emeralds and coke, not the type that you drink. So when they finally catch him, they decide to get creative with their revenge. What follows is about 90 minutes of the most elaborate murder scenes money can buy. But here's where Lenzi went completely off the rails. He didn't just want to make a violent movie. He wanted to make the violent movie. People get impaled through the mouth. A woman gets hung by hooks through her chest. Someone's hand gets chopped off and eaten while they're still alive. Lenzi was basically running a competition with himself to see how disturbing he could get. The real problem was the animal stuff. Just like other Italian cannibal movies, they actually ended the lives of animals on camera. A turtle gets butchered in an extreme close-up, a pig gets the same treatment, a coyote too, all because apparently fake blood wasn't realistic enough, so they decided to add actual death to the mix. Real classy, guys. The UK took one look at this thing and immediately put it on the prosecuted list. Not just banned, prosecuted. That means video distributors could actually go to jail for selling it. But here's the brilliant part. Lenzi used the bans as advertising. Every time another country refused to show it, the marketing got updated. Banned in 25 countries, then banned in 31 countries. Pretty soon, the whole selling point was how many governments didn't want you to see it. Nothing says quality entertainment like multiple countries telling you it shouldn't exist. The distributor in the UK actually got hauled into court and prosecuted under the Obscene Publications Act. they had to stand in front of a judge and explain why they thought it was okay to sell a movie where people get eaten alive. The defense of its artistic expression probably didn't land very well when the evidence included someone getting impaled through the face. Germany banned it so hard they made possession of the uncut version illegal. Police could confiscate copies and fine anyone trying to sell them. The whole country essentially declared that this movie was too dangerous for adults to watch voluntarily. That's quite an achievement in a country that lets you drink beer for breakfast. Australia refused to rate it for years, which means custom agents had to watch cannibal movies as part of their job. Picture explaining that to your spouse. How was work today, honey? Well, I had to determine whether a scene of someone eating inhuman intestines violated our decency standards. Just another Tuesday at the office. The really funny part is that the 31 countries claim was probably totally nonsense, but it sounded impressive, so they kept using it. Pretty soon you had horror fans seeking this thing out specifically because so many places had banned it. The marketing worked perfectly. Tell people they can't have something and suddenly everyone wants it. What's wild is that when people finally saw it, half of them were probably disappointed. Take away the animal cruelty and you've got a pretty standard exploitation flick with better than average gore effects, but by then the legend was already established. Cannibal FEROX had successfully turned government censorship into a profitable business model. Today you can buy it uncut in most places, usually with warning labels about animal cruelty. The bands that once made it notorious are now just trivia facts on the DVD commentary. But for a while there, Lenzi managed to convince the world that his cannibal movie was so extreme that entire governments needed to protect their citizens from it. This whole thing kind of proves that there is no such thing as bad publicity. Getting banned wasn't a problem, it was a feature. Lenzi had figured out how to turn censorship into cash, at least until the distributors started getting arrested. And in my opinion, make your crazy movie. That's fine. We just don't gotta hurt the animals for it. That doesn't belong in movies. Nobody should actually get hurt in the movie. If nobody gets hurt, I'm okay with it. But honestly, making extreme violence was nothing compared to what happened when art met insanity. Because Andrei Zawalski thought profound art could handle anything. Possession is what happens when someone makes the most pretentious art film possible and accidentally creates something more disturbing than actual horror movies. Andrei Zawalski wanted to explore themes of divorce, madness, and Cold War anxiety through surreal imagery. If you want to watch this movie, it's currently on Shudder, and I watched this 2 years ago. It is a wild movie. It is insane. It's got the guy from Jurassic Park in it, by the way. That's what made me want to watch it in the first place. This is nothing like Jurassic Park. What the director ended up happening was Elizabeth Adjani having a mental breakdown in a subway tunnel that made censors question their life choices. The movie is about Anna and Mark, a couple in Berlin whose marriage is falling apart. Anna wants a divorce and starts acting increasingly weird. We're talking supernatural levels of weird. Violent outbursts, mysterious absences, and eventually it turns out she's having an affair with a tentacled creature, because apparently regular infidelity wasn't artsy enough for Zawalski. But then comes the subway scene. Oh boy, the subway scene. Adjani's character has this complete mental and physical breakdown in an underground tunnel. She's squirming on the ground, screaming, throwing herself against the walls, and appears to miscarry something that might not be human. It goes on for several minutes of pure psychological torture that makes you wonder if Adjani needs therapy after filming it. Here's the thing about Isabel Adjani. She doesn't half-ass anything. When Zawalski told her to portray a woman having a supernatural miscarriage while losing her mind, she apparently decided to actually lose her mind for real. The performance is so intense and disturbing that it makes method acting look like community theater. I suggest you watch this movie because it is actually a pretty good movie, but the thing that sells it so much is how good the acting is. It is insane levels of acting. We don't get this level of acting anymore. The UK took one look at this artistic masterpiece and said, nope, that's a video nasty. It didn't matter that this was serious European cinema with deep themes about human alienation. All they saw was a woman having a violent breakdown that involved blood, screaming, and what looked like supernatural gore. Straight onto the banned list with all the cheap slashers it goes. This created a really weird situation where film critics were trying to defend an art house movie that had been lumped in with Driller Killer and Cannibal Holocaust. Picture writing a review that starts with, "This profound exploration of marital breakdown and Cold War paranoia is currently illegal to sell in Britain." That's not a sentence you expect to write about serious cinema. Also, the people that write these like serious cinema things, they always suck at reviewing horror movies. If you ever go look at like an IMDb page of like a horror movie, some of the best ones of all time struggle to even get like higher than a 6. Meanwhile, some like trash cinema romance drama has like a 9-star rating. They are so biased. Like the Oscars isn't even like horror. This is like the first year I can remember that a horror movie was even in the Oscars, and it was The Substance. I don't know. I don't agree with that. I hope that changes as time goes on, because I think horror movies are some of the best movies out there. But anyways, the BBFC's problem wasn't with the tentacle monster or the domestic violence. It was specifically that subway scene. They cited it as showing graphic depictions of miscarriage that were likely to deprave and corrupt viewers. So basically, Ajani's commitment to her craft was so good that it became legally obscene. I think it's crazy that the government would say that watching this would make you a corrupted person. That is an insane thing for a government to like say on a person. If you watch it and you think it's gonna hurt you, turn off the movie. That's all you gotta do. Like, bro, this is a Subway. You made the damn sandwich. You can't complain about it. Police were raiding video stores and seizing copies of what film schools were calling a masterpiece of European cinema. Video store owners had to explain to customers that they couldn't rent the new Isabel Adjani film because it was in the same legal category as movies about people getting drilled in the head, which one is obviously better than the other. You decide. If any of you say the drill movie, I swear to God. The ban lasted through the entire 1980s, which meant that British film students couldn't see one of the most acclaimed horror-adjacent films of the decade. Universities probably had to smuggle in copies for their cinema studies programs. Yes, class, today we'll be studying illegal European art films. Please don't tell the authorities or my wife. I don't want to go to jail. What's really funny is that the rest of the movie is your standard pretentious European divorce drama. People arguing in apartments, long shots of Berlin architecture, meaningful silences. But that one scene was so intense that it overshadowed everything else. Zawalski made a 2-hour art film, and all anyone could talk about was 3 minutes of Ajani losing her mind. When they finally released it in the UK in the 1990s, they cut out parts of the subway scene. So British audiences did get to see this acclaimed artistic achievement, just with the most powerful moment edited out. It's literally like buying the Mona Lisa, but someone put a tape over her smile and drew on a frowny face. The irony is that Ajani won awards for this performance. She took home the Best Actress prize at Cannes for a role that was literally illegal to watch in multiple countries. That's quite a career highlight, getting international recognition for work that police were confiscating from video stores. But ultimately, artistic miscarriage scenes were nothing compared to what some people thought was real. Because Charlie Sheen, yes, the Charlie Sheen, thought he was watching someone actually get murdered. Koji Shirashi made a 40-minute movie that was so convincing, Charlie Sheen called the FBI. Think about that for a second. Charlie Sheen, a man who's done things that would make rock stars blush, watched Guinea Pig 2, and his first thought was, I need to report this to the federal authorities. That's when you know you've created something truly disturbing. Guinea Pig 2 doesn't have a plot in any normal sense. It's just a guy in samurai gear kidnapping a woman, drugging her, and then spending the next 40 minutes cutting her apart piece by piece. No compelling dialogue, no character development, no point except to see how realistic they could make torture look. It's basically a special effects demo reel designed to make people sick. The whole thing is shot like a snuff film. Handheld camera, grainy footage, no fancy lighting or editing. Just a woman tied to a table while someone slowly dismembers her with various tools. They remove her hand, saw off her arm, gouge out her eye, all while she's supposedly still alive. The effects were so good that even horror fans weren't sure what they were watching. Now here's where it gets weird. Someone gave Charlie Sheen a bootleg copy in 1991, probably thinking, hey, this guy likes crazy stuff. Instead of watching it and moving on with his life, Sheen became convinced he'd just witnessed an actual murder. So he did what any concerned citizen would do. He called the FBI and reported the film. Picture the phone call. Hello FBI, this is Charlie Sheen. Yes, that Charlie Sheen. I think I just watched someone get killed on videotape. No, I'm not having an episode again. This looks real. The agents probably thought it was a prank call at first, until they realized he was serious about filing a report. So now the FBI has to investigate whether a Japanese horror movie contains actual murder footage. Federal agents had to sit down and watch someone get dismembered with garden tools to determine if it was evidence of a crime. That's not exactly what they signed up for when they joined law enforcement. Today we're analyzing gore effects to see if they're cinematically fake or criminally real. The investigation was serious enough that they contacted Japanese authorities, who had to track down the filmmakers and get them to prove nobody actually died. Director Koji Shirashi had to demonstrate his special effects techniques to both Japanese police and FBI agents. Imagine that meeting, showing federal investigators how you made fake intestines look real. The actress had to appear in person to prove that she was still alive, because apparently the only way to convince people that a murder victim isn't dead is to have them show up and wave at investigators. Hi, I'm not actually missing any body parts. Those were just fake eyeballs and fake arms. What's really funny is that this whole thing happened because Charlie Sheen was being responsible. The guy who would later have very public breakdowns and coin phrases like winning was the one person who saw something disturbing and immediately called authorities. Meanwhile, thousands of horror fans had watched it and just thought, wow, this is messed up, but this is some pretty insane gore. The FBI eventually closed the case after confirming it was just a movie, but the damage was done. Guinea Pig 2 became infamous as the film so realistic it fooled Charlie Sheen. That's quite a review blurb for your movie poster, convincing enough to trigger federal investigations. Japan quietly pulled the series from circulation after all the international attention. What had been a niche underground horror series suddenly had the FBI's attention, which probably wasn't great for business. The filmmakers went from making extreme art to explaining themselves to multiple governments. The whole thing created this weird situation where a movie was effectively banned, not because censors reviewed it, but because a celebrity accidentally turned it into evidence in a federal investigation. Charlie Sheen had single-handedly made Guinea Pig 2 too hot for distributors to watch. Today you can find Guinea Pig 2 if you really want to, usually with warnings about how realistic it looks, but for years the only copies floating around were the same bootlegs that convinced Charlie Sheen he was watching a snuff film, the FBI investigation being part of the movie's legend. Proof that the effects were just too good for anyone's comfort. But ultimately, convincing celebrities was nothing compared to convincing entire governments about a real tragedy, because sometimes reality makes fiction look tame by comparison. Mikey is a movie about a 9-year-old psychopath who kills his foster families, and it got banned for 29 years, not because it was too violent or too realistic, but because it had the worst possible timing in cinematic history. The movie came out in 1992, but hit UK theaters right after the James Bulger murder case, where two 10-year-old boys ended a toddler. Suddenly, a fictional killer kid movie felt way too real. The plot is pretty standard killer kid stuff. Young Mikey looks adorable and innocent, but he's actually a stone-cold murderer who stages accidents to kill his foster parents. He downs a friend in a pool, electrocutes his foster mom, and beats his dad to, with a baseball bat. Just your typical family movie for Friday night with the children. Obviously, I am joking. Do not watch this with your kids. Ryan Bonsall plays Mikey, and if that name sounds familiar, it's because he was on Family Ties as the sweet, adorable little kid. So audiences went from watching him be adorable with Michael J. Fox to watching him murder adults with household objects. That's quite a career transition, from sitcom child star to banned horror villain in one movie. But then the James Bulger case happened, and suddenly nobody in Britain wanted to see movies about children doing this type of stuff. The BBFC took one look at Mikey and said, absolutely not right now. It wasn't about the violence level or the gore, it was about the public mood. Nobody wanted to be entertained by killers this young when real killers this young were making headlines. The timing was so bad it almost seems planned. Here's a movie about a kid who does this type of stuff, premiering in a country where everyone's talking about kids who actually did this type of stuff. The marketing department probably just gave up and went home. How do you advertise a movie like this when basically the thing that you were advertising is a real story in the front news page? So Mikey got banned, not for 29 days or 29 weeks, but 29 years, nearly 3 decades. There were people who got married, had kids, and sent those kids to college in the time it took for this movie to become legal in Britain. That's what you call holding a grudge. The really weird part is that the movie isn't even that extreme. Take away the kid doing this stuff angle and you've got a pretty standard slasher, but that one element, the age of the killer, was enough to make it radioactive in British culture. Context is everything, and Mikey had the worst context possible. For years, Mikey became this legendary banned film that most people hadn't actually seen. Horror fans knew about it the same way they knew about urban legends. Everyone has heard of it, nobody had actually experienced it. Video store clerks would get asked about it and have to explain that it wasn't just banned, but it was really, really banned. The BBFC kept refusing it every few years when distributors would try again. 1998, nope. 2003, still nope. 2010, absolutely not. They were consistent, you have to give them that. Most bans get lifted as society changes, but apparently Britain never forgot about those two 10-year-old kids. What makes it even funnier is that by the 2010s, way more violent movies were playing in regular theaters. You could watch Saw movies and torture porn at your local multiplex, but a 1992 thriller about a kid doing this type of stuff was still considered too dangerous for British audiences. Priorities, I guess. When they finally lifted the ban in 2022, which was a couple years ago, nobody cared. The big announcement that Mikey was finally legal in the UK got about as much attention as the Weather Report. 29 years of censorship, and when it was over, most people just shrugged and moved on. The movie that was once too dangerous to see became a footnote that nobody bothered reading. But poor timing was nothing compared to what happened when filmmakers claimed educational value again, because some filmmakers decided that fake death just wasn't enough for their movie. Traces of Death took the whole video nasty concept and threw it out the window by using actual footage of people dying. Not actors pretending, not special effects that look real, but genuine video of real human beings having their worst and final day. And someone thought, you know what? Let's sell this as entertainment. The UK took one look at it and said, absolutely not, ever. This wasn't a horror movie in any normal sense. It was basically an hour of real car crashes, real bad stuff, really more bad stuff I can't say on YouTube, and even more bad stuff I can't say on YouTube. You get the idea, all set to death metal music, with some guy narrating like he's hosting a nature documentary about human mortality. Like, picture David Attenborough, but instead of explaining how lions hunt, he's explaining how people die. As the penguins begin to march, we see in the backyard the car begins to march down the highway into the car crash. Oh no, the penguins are dead. That's my impression. I know that's Morgan Freeman, but you get the idea. The whole thing was marketed as 100% real, which was supposed to be the selling point, because apparently watching fake people get ended in movies wasn't satisfying enough for some people. They needed the genuine article. Nothing says quality weekend entertainment like watching actual human beings meet their end while someone plays guitar solos over the footage. The BBFC looked at this thing and basically had an existential crisis. How do you rate something that's not fiction, not documentary, not education, but pure voyeurism? Their solution was simple: ban it completely. Not cut it, not give it an 18 rating, just flat out refuse to let British adults decide for themselves whether they want to watch these things happen to real people. And here's the craziest part. Despite every other movie we've talked about on this list, that ban is still active today. In 2025, you can still not legally buy Traces of Death in the UK. While you can watch people get tortured in Saw movies at your local theater, a 30-year-old compilation of real footage remains too dangerous for British society. And that's some serious commitment to being disturbed by something. And honestly, this is the one case where I kind of agree. We don't need to show real footage. If it's fake, that is fine, go ahead. It being real is just, if it's not a documentary, I don't vibe with it. I don't think it needs to exist. It's just too much. I don't even think you're making an artistic point at that point. You're just trying to exploit for exploitation, which isn't cool. But I'm open to hearing people's opinions because I know not everyone agrees with that, but that's the beauty of being a human. We can have different opinions. It's cool. I respect yours. Anyways, customs agents had to watch this thing as part of their job to determine if imports violated decency laws. So yeah, the argument for banning it was that watching the real footage for entertainment could impair moral development and make people less sensitive to human suffering, which kind of seems reasonable when you put it that way. There's something a little weird about turning actual stuff like that into your Saturday night movie choice. But here's where it gets a little stupid though, because by the time Traces of Death was causing moral panic, the internet was already full of way worse stuff. Honestly, you could probably find actual real violence online easier than you could find this VHS compilation. But the government was drawing the line at commercially packed footage like this with professional distribution. Video stores were even getting warned about carrying it, even though half the clerks had probably even never heard of it. Some poor teenage employee making minimum wage had to explain to customers that they couldn't rent the death compilation because it might corrupt their moral fiber. That's not exactly the conversation you expect when you just want to grab a movie for the weekend. The underground horror community treated it like forbidden treasure. People would trade bootleg copies like they were dealing state secrets. Horror conventions would have whispered conversations about who had seen it and where they got their copy. It became this mythical thing that most people had heard about, but very few had actually watched. What's really funny is that most people who finally saw it were probably disappointed. Take away the shock value of it being real, you've got a pretty boring hour of random footage with amateur narration. But the mystique of being banned kept it legendary among people who collected this type of stuff. The whole thing kind of raises questions about what we're willing to watch for entertainment and why. Apparently the answer is anything as long as it's not actual real, which might be the most reasonable line anyone has drawn in this whole mess. But this movie was nothing compared to content that is still illegal today. And like, not just illegal, really illegal, because this one movie has been illegal longer than most people watching this have been alive. Love Camp 7 holds the record for the most persistent ban in history. This thing came out in 1969, and in 2025, it's still illegal to sell in the UK. If you're wondering why we've used the UK so much, it's because they ban the most type of stuff. Lot to pull from. That's 55 years of the same government saying absolutely not to the same movie. At this point, it's not even about the content anymore. It's about the principle. The BBFC has committed to this ban harder than most people commit to their marriage. The movie is Yahtzee exploitation filth about American spies infiltrating a German camp, but like where adults love each other very much, but they don't actually love each other in this type of movie during World War II. I hate that YouTube makes me censor this, but that's what happens. Yeah, it's basically what happens when someone watched a war movie and thought, you know what this needs? More butts and less historical accuracy. The plot involves rescuing a scientist from a restaurant of that type thing, if you catch my drift, which sounds like the setup of a really inappropriate joke. Now, this was 1969. The whole thing looks like it was filmed by a potato by people who had never seen an actual movie before. The acting is terrible, the effects are non-existent, the budget was probably whatever change the director found in his couch. But somehow, this cheap piece of garbage became the most persistently banned film in British history. The BBFC took another look at it in 2002 and said, nope. The reasoning was that the whole point of the movie was to let men watch women deal with the worst things humans can deal with, which is honestly extremely fair in my opinion. They literally wrote that it exists to invite male viewers to take spectacle in this type of horrible behavior. When the censors are that blunt about why something sucks, and I paraphrase them to protect my channel from being deleted, you know it really sucks. And here's where it gets really stupid. By 2002, you could buy way more extreme stuff from any video store. Regular torture stuff was playing in regular theaters, but somehow this 50-year-old Yahtzee exploitation flick was still too dangerous for British adults to handle. Authorities basically decided that while progress was fine, this particular piece of trash would remain off limits forever. They tried again in 2022, probably thinking that maybe after 50 years, audiences had changed enough. Nope, the BBFC looked at it again and gave the same answer. Still banned, still too offensive, still not happening. That's 2 different centuries of British censors agreeing this movie should not exist. In my opinion, out of all the movies we talked about, this is a bad movie and probably deserves the ban it has. It's not worth anything. There's even more controversy about it, but I don't even want to touch some of the topics it discusses because it's that messed up. You're an adult. If you're watching this, you can go Google it if you want. That's up to you. But this ban has lasted multiple generations of censors, dozens of prime ministers, and basically every major cultural shift in British society. People have been born, lived full lives, and died of old age in this time this movie has been banned. That's insane. This is the movie that time forgot, but the censors never will. So there you have it. 10 movies that went from entertainment to evidence, from banned to legendary, and from cinema to actual crime scenes. Anyways, did you learn anything in this video? I definitely did making it. There's some crazy movies I can't even imagine. Let me know other movies you want me to talk about in this sort of sense down in the comments below. Make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. And if you want to watch a video just like this one, you should click the first video we did on this topic, which is on the screen right now. I'm gonna go bleach my eyes. I will see you all later.